Hello, my name is Nicolai Pfeffer. I'm clarinetist, and today in this little video tutorial for Henle Verlag, I wanted to speak about Robert Schumann's Fantasy Pieces, which are, of course, very well known in the repertoire. They're also traditionally underestimated. They're very challenging for various reasons. And I wanted to talk a little bit about their form and about the connection of the three movements. First of all, a problem is that they all share the same form. They are all in ABA form with a little coda, and they're linked motivically and by attacca transitions, which is rather uncommon. So, for example, other fantasy pieces by Gade or by Winding or even by Nielsen, that is of course not the case, which makes them very, very challenging. Also, I wanted to add that sometimes there is the misconception that these are clarinet solos with an accompaniment of the piano. This is definitely not the case. We need this is true chamber music, and therefore we need to blend very well with the piano. We need to have the greatest range of dynamics and colors, and really have to find a way to sometimes blend to the piano, sometimes be in the foreground or a step in the background when we play these pieces. Also, what I find is quite noticeable is that they increase emotionally as they go. So, for example, the first piece, Zart und mit Ausdruck, tender and with expression, is half of the tempo of the third movement, Rasch und mit Feuer, which translates to fast and with fire, with passion. Let me start by talking a little bit about the beginning of the first movement. Here, a couple of things are already quite noticeable. For example, Schumann's idea of the ascending or a descending half tone. He uses this as a declamatory motive many times, not only in the fantasy pieces, but also, for example, in his piano concerto or at the beginning of the oboe romances. And it is important for me to state that when you play these pieces, you have to not make all the intervals very even and just dark, which is sometimes an idea when you play a German repertoire. But in fact, you have to develop a sense for the energy of each interval, regardless if it's the half tone, which plays, of course, an important role here, as we will see later, or also like octaves, which, for example, is very difficult in bar 17. That is very much important to me. Another thing that you might want to consider is that the tuplets that the piano plays on the right hand are actually not of a greater significance, I would personally say. Much more important is the bass line, the left hand of the piano, which forms together with the clarinet kind of intense dialogue, or even sometimes it seems to be like a little duet. So when you study with your chamber music partner together, make sure that the tuplets, even if they are challenging a little bit in terms of fingering, don't get too over-exaggerated. Much more important is the fine legato playing of the pianist and listening to the bass line. Another thing that you might want to consider is in bar 11 with pickup, please do not rush with this kind of chromaticism, even in the diminution, which follows later. Instead, I would try to, when you play the Schumann, try to find and develop a very delicate sense of rubato at this passage, but also in the B part, for example, bar 27 with pickup, that we will be talking about a little bit later. next very difficult part is actually the legato playing in bar 17, the slur to the high E flat. I would advise you to just phrase mentally a little bit further to the A flat of the following bar. Then you phrase, you give the energy to the root of the chord, and you don't need to worry about that nobody would hear the high E flat. It's going to be very much noticeable anyway. But try to just go on to the A flat of the following bar. Notice then how beautifully Schumann writes this little cadence of clarinet and piano together. And he gives the resolution to the piano in the following bar. Bar 22 and the following bars are especially important as we have this fortepiano writing of Schumann when he puts an emphasis on the halftone step. I think he just wants to put this concept of the rising and descending halftone more into the consciousness of the listener. Make sure they remain in the dynamic of the musical environment, so they don't burst out or somewhat like that. Let me play that for you. Another thing that I wanted to mention briefly also for the second movement, when Schumann writes these little hairpins, like for example already in bar 2, make sure this doesn't get too exaggerated. It is also meant to be a marking for an expressive note, let's not do too much. As we now enter the middle section, the B part, what Schumann wants to do is he wants to break out from this minor, let's say, depression, and finds a way to go to A major, which he doesn't succeed for, which doesn't work for this very moment. In fact, we enter an inner space of D minor, which is followed by very wide and very sonorous F major arpeggios in the clarinet and the piano part. This color, let's say, is interrupted by the narrowness and the tightness of two diminished chords in bar 31 and 33. And Schumann wants to break out from this narrowness, and somehow he writes a crescendo and even leads the music to a forte, but he doesn't succeed, and the music kind of resignedly falls back into A minor. Let me play that for you. And as we now enter the recapitulation or the reprise of this part, the A part again, and we hear the initial melody, it is very important for me that not only we play pianissimo, but we have to show to the listener that it is really a very sad moment, because going to A major at this point did not work. So as we repeat this initial melody, for me, it is some kind of very tragic yet introverted element. So then many of the ideas and motives are repeated from the A part. And as we enter the coda, Schumann restates this initial melody of the movement, leading it to very dramatic chords in the piano, which kind of cause this transition or this transition to the long desired A major. Even if there is no piano, let me try to play that for you. And at this point, also by using again this concept of descending half tones, we have finally reached this long desired A major, which is stated very calmly and very positively together with the clarinet and the piano. The second piece of the Schumann Fantasy Pieces, Lebhaft, leicht, which translates to lively and light, is much more playful than the first piece, which has this darker mood somehow. What I wanted to add is, of course, within such a video tutorial, I can give only encouragements and hints. It is, as I said, an encouragement to come up with your own thoughts and ideas. It is especially important, as we know these are Fantasiestücke, fantasy pieces, and I want to really recommend that you try to find your own version of these pieces. So what happens in the second piece for the moment is that we phrase together with the piano over an ascending E major scale. Make sure that you really form and shape these big intervals at the beginning of the clarinet entrance, with cold and fast air. And then it is all about your creativity, how to develop and play or find a dynamic for all these repeats that happen in the A section of the second piece. So actually there are many musical and many approaches and creative approaches possible. The same thing or the same concept also applies to the B part, which is very interesting because, as you remember, I was talking about the ascending and descending half tone in the first piece. Now what Schumann actually does here is that he transfers this idea of the mini motive E and F to the larger form of the piece. So the A part that I just played is an E major, while the middle section, the B part that now follows, is in F major. And as we return to the A part later, we kind of fall back into E major again, pardon me. There are many concepts or ideas for this B part possible. In any case, it is, I think, very light and very leggero to me. You can try many different tempos. You can kind of come into the tempo, play a little bit faster even, but the most important thing is to really have this dense dialogue with the piano and create common sounds and sound colors. It is very much important. So this childlike freshness is very much important and very significant to the B part. There again, you see these little hairpin markings that we already saw in the first movement. As I said again, these are merely expressive notes. The next section of the B part, which begins in bar 35, is a little bit more espressivo and a little bit more singing or lyrical before we return to this leggero mood of the beginning of the B part. As we now go back to the reprise, Schumann introduces the same melody from the beginning again, but now it seems like a memory, like it is very reminiscent, and leads us to a very calm and very elegant coda, which is formed with the common phrasing of clarinet and piano. And like that, very innocently, the second piece ends. What is important to me to add is the coda is entitled Nach und nach ruhiger, which means more and more slower. So be careful, make sure not to play immediately too slow. It is very important that the music kind of dissolves and leads us to this very beautiful ending of the piece. The third movement, Rasch und mit Feuer, fast and with fire, is characterized by a brilliant Sturm und Drang atmosphere. It's almost like a champagne mood, very euphoric, very extroverted, and very extremely happy and joyful. At the same time, it is also the movement where the B part is the most dramatic, in the most dramatic mood. So we return actually to the contrast of A major in the A part and A minor in the middle section. Also, it is noticeable that the structure of the movement is characterized by shorter phrases and which are interrupted by these forte accents. So for example, in bar 5. So all these small little phrases add up together to this very brilliant and happy and almost euphoric atmosphere. Let me play a little bit for you. In the next section from bar 11 with upbeat, one can actually see how Schumann reintroduces the beginning, the initial melody of the first movement. And therefore he really connects the three movements not only by repeating motives, but also with the attacca transitions. Also, due to these attacca transitions, the third movement is definitely the most challenging movement in terms of, it is very intense. It is very intense to play. Not only because Schumann puts very few breath marks, which is for the wind instrument like a clarinet, of course, not ideal. But what he does with these attacca transitions additionally is that he creates the feeling of a continuous development, let's say. Playing the Schumann Fantasy Pieces feels like we are actually only playing one continuous movement that increases emotionally. The B part, which starts at measure 25 with pickup, is characterized by a big contrast. We have a very energetic piano, which again sings like in the first movement with the bass of the piano. The triplets in the right hand are not as impossible, I would clearly say. So this is really tremendously expressive and challenging to play. Somehow I'm also deeply convinced that this contrast stands for Schumann's inner conflict. As we know, he had these two characters, Florestan and Eusebius, which kind of stood for contrasting sceneries, contrasting also psychological ideas in his writing, in his works. And I think not only here, but especially in the B part of the third fantasy piece, one can really hear these two characters speaking. As we now return into the reprise, the A part, Schumann repeats much of the motivic material from the A part, and the music actually results in a extremely lyrical a coda, and culminates finally in this very great and very euphoric A major mood of the end. And with lots of energy and lots of passion, actually, Schumann writes faster, and he kind of rushes into a brilliant and very happy, overwhelmingly beautiful and joyful last measures of the piece. I really hope that you liked some of my ideas and my opinion about the Schumann Fantasiestücke, which is so important to the clarinet repertoire. I would invite you from the bottom of my heart to do justice to this title and actually develop your own fantasy pieces, make them very personal, try to look inside the wonderful writing of Robert Schumann, try out as many creative ideas as possible, and enjoy these three very, very wonderful, rich and eternally beautiful movements of music. Thank you for watching this little video tutorial for Henle Verlag about the three fantasy pieces by Robert Schumann. See you next time. Hope you enjoyed.